Welcome to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're going to be discussing how to evaluate your summer job experience and to make sure that you leave on a high note. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan, that's me, and Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox and the Bar Exam Toolbox, and we also ran the Catapult Conference, and in my spare time, I run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on iTunes. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. With that, let's get started.
Welcome back. Today we're talking about how to evaluate your summer job experience and make sure you leave on good terms. So let's get right to it. Say I'm working in a summer legal job after my first or second year of law school, and the summer is drawing to a close. So, Alison, what do I need to be thinking about at this point?
Well, I think a couple of things. Number one, you always want to leave on a high note, and that's something we'll talk about in more detail later. But I think beyond that, at this point, you've got to be evaluating sort of, is this job working for you? Is this something that you want to continue doing? In some cases, that might be an option. In some cases, it might not be an option. But, I think one of the first things I would have people think about, especially if you have, say, 3 or 4 weeks left, is are there some experiences that you still want to get out of this job? Mm-hmm. So, for example, like you worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office. What kind of stuff do they take you to do?
Well, we got to appear in court, which was pretty fun. And we even got to negotiate some misdemeanor plea agreements and things like that. And that was pretty exciting. We got to watch some other trials going on in the courthouse, which was a great experience just to sit in a federal courtroom and get to watch some litigation that was happening real time. I think I definitely did some research and writing, but I think also just to have the opportunity to get to know some of the attorneys, especially if you learn that some of them have a background that interests you or have a passion that interests you, you definitely want to try and, go to their office, see if they have time for coffee to try and build some relationships. Because sometimes these people are quite interesting and have had a variety of career paths, and they could even turn into some really great mentors.
Yeah, absolutely. Similarly for me, I think any summer job I ever had, I made a hobby out of being a big law summer associate. So I did that 3 different times, 3 different places. But I think, in each one of those, I think at a minimum, if you wanted to, like you got to go to court for whatever case was on trial. That's something that can be kind of fun to do. If you want to work with a certain person or a certain team, if there are things that you came in thinking that you were going to be able to do, and maybe you haven't been able to do them yet, obviously that can be a little bit tricky because you don't want to be that demanding law student who's like, I didn't get to work on tax and I really wanted to work on tax. That's probably not the best way to approach it. But I think, it's definitely valid if you have some spare time to go to whoever's organizing the work and say, hey, this is something I'm really interested in. Is there any possibility that I could participate in a project? Mm-hmm. Or, for example, like going to a meeting with a client. That's something, we would often bring summer associates along sometimes to meetings where, frankly, you're like, I'm not sure this person should be in here. But, oftentimes partners are happy to bring people along and kind of just introduce them to the client. It's like, this person's working for us for the summer. If you have any concerns, obviously, like we won't have them here, but typically nobody has any real concerns about it. Mm-hmm. Because, this is the time to be thinking about, like, what do you want to get out of this job? Mm-hmm. And whether that would be possible.
And I also think it's important to think about, where is that job going? If you are a summer associate and your goal is to get an offer at the end of the day, it's probably good to also make sure that, say, you've made some FaceTime with everybody on the hiring committee
Yeah, exactly. You want, when people sit down, whatever environment you're working on, but when people sit down to evaluate, do they want to bring you back as a full-time employee, they need to know who you are. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
At a minimum. And so I think this is where, asking people to go to coffee or have lunch together doesn't have to be anything fancy. You know, you don't have to be like, do you want to go out to dinner with me? Probably that's overkill. But, you know, sending an email to somebody that you were interested in meeting and saying, hey, you know, I'm sure you're really busy, but if you have time, like in the next week or so when I'm here, I would love to have a chance to, you know, grab a coffee with you and learn more about this case you're working on.
Yeah. And if you haven't spent much time in an office environment, the coffee run is really like the easiest way to get some face time with somebody. I mean, where the office was located, where I was working, there was a Starbucks kind of like just down on the ground floor, just like a building over. And it was a nice little like 15-minute activity. You know, you went down the elevator, you walked, you talked, you ordered your Starbucks, you stood outside, you waited in line, you got your Starbucks, maybe you walked around the building, you went back up. But it was just such a low commitment thing to ask somebody to do, but it still gave you enough face time, and sometimes it would lead to something else. You know, if you want...
Right. I mean, just think, Lee, like you remember where we came up with the idea for having our very first conference?
Oh,
it was in line at Starbucks.
Oh my gosh, see? Look at that connection. I did not draw that connection until right then. That is so true. It was in line in Starbucks. Great things happen in line at Starbucks, even though I'm not a huge fan of Starbucks coffee. Sorry, Starbucks.
You never know. Right. Maybe they'd like to sponsor this episode. But no, I mean, I think that's right. And I think, you know, for us, like it was either you could go for coffee. Another one that we did a lot of times with the summers was getting frozen yogurt in the afternoon. So, you know, when you hit that kind of like 3 p.m. lull, everybody's kind of not really getting anything done anyway. It's kind of you've already had your coffee for the day, so you can't go for coffee necessarily. But there was like a frozen yogurt place, you know, right across the street. And so same thing, you know, meet, go down to the elevator, talk about what flavor you're going to get, do some chit chat, get your frozen yogurt, go back to your desk. 20 minutes.
20 minutes, yeah. And the other thing to also remember is it's not just about talking to the attorneys and the people on the hiring committee, but, you know, support staff also talk to their bosses about how they feel about summers. And so,
yes, you can get a lot of brownie points if on that frozen yogurt run, you decide to bring something back for your secretary.
Yep, it's amazing. So, you know, really remembering that it's the office as a whole and your reputation as a whole that they look at, which I think is really important. Some summer programs did like midsummer evaluations. Alison, did you guys do midsummer evaluations?
Gosh, I have no idea.
I know, it's been a while.
I'm like, maybe, I don't know.
They were
I don't
like,
think so.
They were very unofficial. Like the head of the summer program would just wander around and kind of pop by your office and like say whether or not they thought it was going well, which could be kind of anxiety inducing. But if you did get some feedback that would be actionable, I think that instead of just thinking that your chances of getting a job are totally sunk, just try and, you know, take that action or make some changes, or if they gave you recommendations, like try, you know, I think just keeping a positive attitude, because you really don't know what's going to happen in the hiring space. You don't know the firm's hiring needs. You don't know how many people, you know, I was shocked at some of the summers in my class that didn't get offers, but, you know, I wasn't in the room. Like, I don't know why they didn't seem to have someone going to bat for them. All I could worry about was myself.
Right. And I think this issue of feedback is something that you should be thinking about more generally. Like what type of feedback have you been getting, if you've been getting any? But in a lot of cases, you might not have gotten any feedback. I mean, you know, attorneys are busy wherever you're working. I'm sure, you know, you've probably been supervised by attorneys who are extremely busy. And it's not that, you know, they don't care about your professional development or they don't want you to have feedback. It's just that, you know, I think if you're working for like the public defender for the summer, like this person has 100, 200 cases. You're probably the last thing on their mind. No offense. But, you know, it's like basically your best case scenario is probably like you turn in your work that they've asked you to do and you never hear about it because they just took it and used it. But that doesn't mean you can't go to them and ask for some sort of feedback. And I think that's something they should be thinking about these last few weeks is like, who have I worked with, you know? And again, it doesn't have to be this like huge formal thing. It can just be, for example, asking them if they'd like to go out for coffee and on the way being like, hey, you know, if you have any thoughts about how I could do, you know, how I could improve the work quality of what I did for you, you know, I'd be all ears. And if they're like, no, everything was great. And you're like, awesome. So how about those Mets? You know? It doesn't have to be this like enormous thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's a really good point. And make sure that you're open to feedback. Remember, feedback is not just criticism. It is a way to, you know, better yourself and learn from your experiences. So make sure you don't get defensive when you get feedback. Make sure you're open to taking it and learning from it. It's really
right. And it's one of the, it's one of those things. This is a very valuable skill set for any career, is knowing how to at least appear to be accepting the feedback that you're getting. Because, if somebody comes to you and like, I think like this wasn't done correctly or whatever, you decide how you're going to react to that. And if your reaction is like, what do you mean? I did it perfectly. They're not, which might be like your initial reaction just intuitively in a lot of cases, but that's not helpful.
Right.
Basically, if you've made a mistake on something, you need to own that mistake and sort of, be receptive to ways to improve it, or even suggest ways to improve it yourself. So it's like, if someone's like, you missed a case, it's like, oh my God, no, you can't blame your school. You can't blame your legal writing program. Like, you're the one who did this. It's not Westlaw's fault that they didn't tell you about it.
Right. Yeah.
So, you've got to have some respect. This is things that everyone has to work on. But, something like, I really feel like I should have gotten that. Like, in the future, here's what I'm going to do to avoid having that happen. That's all anyone's looking for.
Exactly. And I think that when most people, even if they're angry or frustrated, oftentimes they're not even that angry or frustrated at you. They're just frustrated at the situation. And
because they're getting like, the stuff rolls downhill.
Yeah, exactly.
They're getting stuff from above, who's getting stuff from the judge. It's like, if you're at the bottom of that totem pole, you're going to hear about it.
Yeah, exactly. One thing that you kind of mentioned earlier that I think we should go back to is really thinking about what you liked about the job. I mean, even if the job isn't something that's going to turn into work later down the road, it is such a great opportunity to start to compile what feels like a good practice for you, because these different jobs have such different lifestyles. And I think the thing about the summer associate experience, like at a firm, is it's oftentimes not a realistic experience, partly because you're,
really?
I mean, there's so many reasons why, but really what you should be paying attention to are the associates, the first and second year associates, who are not necessarily on all of the boondoggles with you, but who are, maybe working long hours, and try and talk to them about the work that they do. What do they do on a day-to-day basis? Because that's the job you're going to get when you start there. And, I think it's so easy when you're being, pulled around by partners or senior associates to sit in on client meetings or go to a deposition or go to court. When you have now a billable hour that you're trying to make, they're not going to necessarily have the bandwidth to do that anymore. And so,
right, they're not going to bring like the third chair to some sort of like client meeting that isn't really that important.
No, because they don't want to pay for it.
The client is looking at that person in the meeting going, how much am I paying per hour for this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important that you start to understand how the business model works too, because I think depending on how the business is set up, it really can educate you on what you're going to spend your time doing. So,
yeah. And I think, this applies well beyond just the big law firm. Like, I mean, obviously, I would imagine most people starting as associates really don't understand the economics of a law firm. But I think that's something that if you do think this is a career path that you're going to pursue, like you need to understand the economics of a law firm. You need to know the difference between an equity partner and a non-equity partner. I would be curious to know if the firm you're working at, for example, like requires a big down payment when you become a partner. Like lots of people are not aware that you're expected to pay, like in some cases, over $100,000 basically for the privilege of becoming a partner. These sort of things, like you need to understand.
And what's of counsel versus partners, and
it's just like, what are the billable hour expectations? And it's, they'll tell you one number that's like seems reasonable, but then it's like, well, what are the bonus levels? And then that's when like the rubber really hits the road. Because basically if you're not hitting that bottom bonus level, you're probably not going to be there very long. So
yeah. And I think the other thing, when you and I were both at law firms in kind of a bit of a nasty economic time, and with what's going on in the world, who knows when the next nasty economic time is
might be sooner rather than later.
Yeah, if you watch the stock market. But I think the other thing that came out of those kind of rockier economic times was not just what are my billable hours, but how am I going to get that billable work and how is it going to be assigned to me? I think those are interesting things to try and pick up. You can't necessarily go and march into somebody's office and be like, I need to know how you assign work. But
you can pay attention.
You can pay attention and talk to associates. Like some associates will tell you that, you kind of get picked by a partner and they funnel your work. And if you don't have a great relationship with your partner, there's like nothing you can do about it. Because then you're just kind of stuck. It's very hard to get out from under somebody. Or it can be like, well, maybe there are groups of partners that work together, or you belong more to a practice group. There's so many different ways that these firms are run, but you better learn about how things like work is assigned, because, those Bill of Law requirements, it's scary to have too much work to do. It's really scary not to have enough work to do.
Yeah, and these, like I was saying earlier, these apply beyond big law. If you're working for the summer in a nonprofit, it's, I would be curious about things like, well, where does your funding come from? How much funding are you expecting? Is it, I don't know that much about the economics of a nonprofit, but if I was going to pursue that career path, I would want to know that. And the same thing, if you're in a government agency or government organization, how does the U.S. Attorney's Office hire? How does the Public Defender's Office hire? What am I expected to do? Are there steps they're sort of expected to go to in order to get these positions? Again, like, of course, you have to be judicious about who you're talking to about these things, but I think you can find out a lot in a lot of organizations.
I think that's true. And I think, these non-formal conversations that you have with different people in the office are really some of the best ways to do this, because it's very unthreatening for everybody. Most people are likely to share a bit more on a coffee run than they would be even sitting in their office.
Right. Or some like affinity groups. Sometimes they'll like really, dig out more dirt than if you're sitting in like the whole firm, whatever. They'll give you all sorts of presentations, but you need to do your own. You need to do your own digging as well.
Exactly.
But, and I think it's also about like what type of work are you doing, and what are you enjoying or not enjoying about the work that you're doing? Are there things you want to do more of, or the things you want to do less of? And is this the right environment for you over the long term? And I think some of this, it's easy to delude ourselves into thinking like, oh yeah, like this is great, I'm getting paid a lot. But like for me, for example, if I look back on a lot of my behavior when I was a summer associate, like it suggests that maybe this was not really something I was entirely into, so like I was showing up like late to the office, and there was one day in particular where I basically like literally like hid out in the law school library because I couldn't, like I had a legitimate reason to do some research. But, I remember like on my BlackBerry texting my secretary being like, I've got some really important research I've got to do up at the law school, so I'm not going to be in until lunchtime. It's like if you don't want to go to your office, that might be a sign that maybe this is not the right environment for you to be in.
And even other things just about different firms have different feels, or different law offices completely. I even remember interviewing and some firms, walking down the hallway, and it was completely quiet. Like everyone was just in their offices. Most of the doors were shut, and thinking it was super spooky. Like,
I thought that's like normal for a law firm.
Not all of them. Some were spookier than others, but then I think some of the West Coast firms, I think, are a little more informal. But being able to like see people talking to each other in the hall, or like hear people talking to each other, and not just kind of like locked up in their offices. I think, you want to test the environment, because different firms do have different cultures.
Oh yeah, definitely. I remember
make sure that it'll jive with you.
Yeah, I remember my office mate when had just finished my first year, and I was sharing an office with someone who had just done her 2L year. So she was like summering for real, basically. I was kind of like doing it as a hobby. But after, and this was actually a pretty informal firm by New York standards, like pretty small, pretty informal, pretty entrepreneurial. But then after that, for a couple of weeks, she went to a sort of 2 or 3 person practice that worked in an area she was really interested in. And I had coffee with her after, like normally during the school year. And she was like, wow, I just felt so much more like I could be myself at this other place that I worked. Like, I just like, it was really eye-opening after the summer of trying to be fancy. Suddenly I was like, oh, like these are my people. Like I feel comfortable here. And I think that's really valuable.
I think that's true. And, I think we can all get so caught up with a summer job, especially the one that might lead to an offer, by just forgetting that you should evaluate whether or not you're happy there, and just being obsessed with getting the offer. Because I think that that's really what the law schools want you to do. Like they would never want you to turn down an offer. They want you to
you can.
You can. And I think that, and I'm not to say that you necessarily should, but if you really see that this is going to go somewhere bad fast, and it's not a good fit for you, I think you at least deserve to spend some time really evaluating whether or not this is the next step you want to take in your legal career, or if there are other options that are going to be better fits for you.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with sort of trying this out for the summer and being like, all right, well, that was an interesting experience, but I can't see myself doing this long term. I'm going to spend the final year of law school really repositioning to do something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's a hard choice to make.
It is.
I mean, somebody's dangling, what are they paying now? $180,000 paycheck in front of you.
Yeah.
Like that's hard to walk away from, but it may ultimately be the right choice.
Yeah. I mean, it's at least worth really chewing on.
Yeah. And not just about, like this is a sort of, if you're facing that choice, I would say you probably should be working with like a private career counselor. Mm-hmm. I mean, if your law school has people, great. But again, like you have to understand their incentives. Their incentive is for you to take that job.
Right.
If you're thinking that's not maybe what you want to be doing, I would say it's worth investing some time and probably money into having someone who can walk you through like, okay, what do you really want? Like, how are you going to make this happen? And maybe in the end you decide to do it, but at least you have a more informed opinion on it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think giving yourself that space to really think about what you want your life to look like, taking into all factors, especially maybe you have some factors that are changing. Maybe you have a family situation that's changing. Maybe you have responsibilities that are changing, outside of school and life, whatever that might be. You better spend some time making sure that this job and this career path line up with all of those.
Right, and getting everyone else on board.
Yeah.
If there are other people who need to be on board with your decisions.
Exactly.
Whoever those people
might be. Okay, so what about like things you can take away from a job? I mean,
there's some practical stuff here I think you need to think about. Number one, I would say first and foremost, if you're thinking you're going to use a writing sample, you probably need to get permission, and you should do that probably before you leave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because oftentimes you may have to edit it down or deal with confidentiality and things like that.
Exactly. You probably are going to have to take out client names. You may have to change some of the facts. You basically want to make sure that if you're going to use a writing sample that you produce for this job, that they're comfortable with that. Mm-hmm. And for example, if you're applying for a clerkship or something, like you're going to need a writing sample.
Yeah. And then I think references are really important. You hopefully have built some solid relationships there, and maybe some
if not too late.
Exactly, not too late. But
time to get a coffee date on your calendar pretty much every day for the rest of the time you're there.
Exactly, but you never know what opportunities are going to be presented to you. It might be a clerkship or other, jobs, depending on what the setup is, and you really want to know like who might be able to help you and serve as that reference. And I think this is really important, especially if you have gone straight through law school, because you probably do not have a lot of like corporate or professional references on your resume. And so especially after that first year job, you would be great to have somebody say, this person is professional and nice and on top of their game if somebody came calling.
Yeah, and I think particularly for public interest stuff, I mean, that's how people get jobs, is someone picks up the phone for you and says, you should really hire Lee because she worked for us this summer. She did a great job. If we had a position, we would definitely take her in a heartbeat, and I'm sad to see her go.
Right.
That's what you need.
Yep.
Like, I would hire this person if I could, but I can't. So as a favor, I'm giving them to you.
Exactly.
And, that might not happen in a large firm. But again, like if you're doing clerkships, people, everybody went to school together. These people have worked together. Mm-hmm. I got one interview for a clerkship because a partner I worked with at a firm called his buddy and was like, hey, you should talk to Alison because she seems great. Mm-hmm. These are the things like you just want to suss out. You should probably also at least be aware of what their general policy is. I mean, like, from the HR people, like, do they confirm that you worked there? Like, are they comfortable with people giving references, things like that? Mm-hmm. And also, I think, in terms of just even beyond the sort of, I need a reference, you also may find people that you'd actually like to stay in touch with. So whether they're mentors or just people that, you might want to have lunch with at some point. I think the key here is like you really want to get their information and probably connect with them on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. Because LinkedIn, for most people in the legal profession, that's like really their stable resume. If you just have their work email, because people are moving around so much, 2 or 3 years down the road, you might want to reach out to this person for some reason and realize like you have literally no way to find them.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point. The internet has really like change that for you. That it's so much easier to keep in touch with people when you don't have old Rolodexes. Wow, that makes me sound super old, that I remember when people had Rolodexes.
Oh yeah, I like loved mine. I had like one that spun around. It was like color coded. It was amazing. But you want to deal with this. You want to build those relationships now, so that it's not like 6 months from now. Suddenly, like, this person gets a random LinkedIn request and they're like, who are you? And also, this makes the point, your LinkedIn stuff needs to be up to date. It needs to be current. You should have a photo, so when they forget who you are, they can look at you.
Oh, can we say the one thing, though, about the photo? Please don't use a photo of you partying or something like that, or from a wedding.
LinkedIn. This is LinkedIn.
This is LinkedIn.
Professional.
Like, yes, have your friend take a picture of you when you come home from work in your suit and standing in front of a nice white wall or whatever, and put that on your LinkedIn profile. Please, please, please.
Yeah, and, the stuff, like, it should go without saying, but it needs to be professional. It needs to be accurate. It doesn't need to be fancy. You don't need 100 recommendations from people. But it does need to have basically, where are you in law school? What do you look like? Where did you summer? So the person can be like, oh, okay, put the pieces together. They summered for us. I think their name looks familiar. I think I talked to them at a summer event once. Okay, yeah, I'll be friends with them. Or
yeah, exactly. Yep. So I think it's just important to remember that you are all really building your professional network and your professional persona. And you really don't want them clicking on your LinkedIn and being like, oh, they're holding a red cup.
Yeah, like, are they still in college? Why is this person getting in touch with me? Are they like, I don't understand who this is?
Yeah, that's not the reaction that you want. So, no.
Definitely not.
All right. So
one thing I think people sometimes overlook that can be really useful is, it's easy to think like, oh yeah, I'll totally remember like every detail of what I did years from now. But like, as we were just saying, there are things we don't remember at all.
Right.
And so I think it's good to have a task list of like the actual stuff you did this summer. So more detailed than, drafted summary judgment motion. It should be like, did research on topics X, Y, and Z, and, did this, and this. Because ultimately, when you're doing your resume, these are the things you need to include.
And I think it's interesting that that's often advice that they give people in their jobs, is to keep these documents, because when it comes up for review time, you oftentimes can't even remember what you worked on in the last year either.
No, I think this is advice I got from the judge that I clerked for, and I don't think I followed it. But, he or the secretary they were like, you should have a running list of literally like everything that you do. And frankly, like, it would be useful to have that, because I don't remember like everything I did. So even when you're moving into a job, I think it's just a great practice, really, to make yourself do.
It's true. Although, I mean, I don't do that anymore. Do you?
Well, luckily, Lee, we're not applying for jobs, so I kind of know what you do. You know what I do.
Well, but we always say like we're supposed to update like every time we're mentioned in an article or something like that. It's very hard to keep these records, so you do have to just make it a priority.
Yeah, it's one of those things that no one really wants to do, but ultimately when you need it, it turns out to be really useful. Like if we had been keeping a mention of every time that, we were mentioned and actually had a like up-to-date press page, that would be amazing. But we were lazy and we don't. So
it happened.
Now it's like, wait, what was that article we were like talked to that person about like a long time ago?
I know. Yeah. So we like to you to follow our advice, but this time just follow our advice. Don't take us as a model.
Trust us, it would have been great if we'd done this.
Exactly. All right. And what about other like more kind of unofficial than references, mentors, like, do you think it's okay to continue to email people? Like, is it okay to reach out a few months afterwards, hopefully to people you really had a relationship and ask for that coffee date, even if you're back in school?
Yeah, I think one thing is, it's always better to sort of offer someone something of value and then ask for the favor. So, if you're thinking of someone who's like in a certain practice area, or maybe even it could be a personal thing, like they have certain hobbies or things they're just really into, and you happen to see an article that's very related that you think they would enjoy, something like that, it's a great opportunity to be like, hey, I just happened to see this article on, either this topic that I know you do research in, or, the fact that I know you're really into like rollerblading and there's this cool new rollerblading thing I saw, whatever. And in that, sort of float that, and they're like, oh, thanks, that's great. Then you can be like, oh, I'd love to catch up. Like, do you have time for coffee? But I think you have to be a little judicious about not just being like, hey, I want to have coffee with you like 4 months later.
Right.
I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I like that idea of at least being able to reach out and have like a reason for reaching out. And I actually think that some of the non-professional ways, if you did build a relationship with somebody and they are an avid hiker and you come across something about the best hikes in the Bay Area, to send it and say like
that's perfect.
Yeah, like came across my desk, like thought this would be something you were interested in. Would love to catch up some time about what you're doing. Could we meet for coffee? And I think, a lot of people will even say things like, I'm in trial, I'm too slammed, like, maybe in a couple of weeks. And that's totally fine. But even if they don't follow up immediately, I do think it is a way to easily stay on someone's radar. I mean, I wouldn't email people every week.
No, but like if nothing else, then the next time you happen to run into them at some event or something, then they're kind of like, oh, hey, I feel bad. Like we were supposed to have coffee.
Right. That's right. That's right. So what about the actual exit process? Do you just get to drop your key card at the door and run out screaming?
Well, I mean, you can if you never want to hear from them again. No, I think this is an opportunity to be a professional. And what that means is you need to leave everything you've worked on, all these projects. You need to leave them in like really good condition so that someone else can pick them up. Because the thing to keep in mind is you were there for 2 or 3 months. A lot of these cases or deals or whatever you've been working on, they're going to go on for years, and so someone else is going to come on board. They're going to have to get up to speed. Think about ways to make that easy for them.
Yeah. Basically, anything you can do to make someone else's job easier is perfect.
Oh, yeah, because a lot of these, like, imagine, like, say you were doing, like, I don't know, a background dossier on some important witness or something. Like, this is going to be passed from person to person to person. And if you make it super easy for them to hand it off and them to get up to speed on who this person is, what the deal is, where these documents are, people are going to love that. And probably lots of people are going to see it, Yep. And they're going to be like, gosh, who did this like amazing chart that just tells me where everything is? This is so great. That's what you're looking for. You want to be that person.
Yep, exactly. And I also think just the administrative stuff too, like time entries, if they're probably not billing your work, but if they've told you to bill time. Like,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can guarantee you in a law firm, someone's going to look at that.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to be sitting there, but like, oh, did this person actually do anything all summer? What were they working on? And they may or may not bill it to the client, but they're going to look at it.
Yeah, exactly. And, and I think even checking in with administrative staff that might be working for you and saying, like, is there anything I'm supposed to do?
Right.
Like, they often know the drill and can give you some tips about how certain people like things, whether it's files or documents or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think it's probably a good idea to at least offer to have a call or a meeting with whoever has been giving you work, like your supervisor, just to make sure they understand where everything is, and then definitely document after that meeting. As we discussed in our meeting, all of the files for the Smith case are whatever the file path is. So that 6 months from now, when they're like, oh my God, like, where was that assignment I was working with that person on? They'll find the email and be like, oh, that was easy. Yeah. I like them.
Yeah. Oh, should we also maybe make one side comment about something that came up in one of our own meetings the other day about how sometimes people forget to not use work email for personal things?
Sure.
This is another side tip along with our like LinkedIn, don't be holding a red cup. Like, you're likely going to get a law firm email, and remember that the law firm owns the email.
And yeah, they can always go back and look at anything you've written in there.
Right. So just
this may be too late for you now, but
but if you are not in a summer yet, or you're thinking about law school, or if you made this mistake, learn from it. Don't do it again. But I think it is really important to remember that try and keep your personal life out of your work email, and that anyone could go back and reread what's in those emails at any time.
But that's actually another good point, is one of the things, because these are law firms, a lot of them are required, to keep documents for a certain amount of time. So, if you're listening to this, you're like, oh my God, I'm going to delete my entire inbox right now. You probably can't do that.
Yeah.
You will get in trouble for doing that. And you want to be, you want to basically make sure you understand. And a lot of firms will send out a memo like, do or do not delete X, Y, and Z. But you want to make sure you understand what you're supposed to be doing, and do not just go in and like delete your entire email account, because a lot of times they have to be backing this stuff up.
Right. Now, that's not to say that you can't like send someone a funny link or something on your like work email. That's fine. But just always,
as long as it's not a very bad taste or, any of the ists, like we don't want racist, sexist, whatever, stuff going through your work email. Trust us.
Right. Again, yes.
Anyone who's done document review is like, yeah, you get a lot more careful.
Oh, yeah. That was definitely my sobering moment in the doc review is when you're reading basically like for 8 hours a day, someone's computer and everything they have on their computer, and you're reading about their love life and their house hunting and all of these crazy things that you will find in document review, and then you start to hear the horror stories of other people in the firm or who have been partners of the firm where their firm got had to go into litigation and their emails got read, personal emails that were used on a work computer by their own associates in the office and crazy things like that. Like, you just start to think twice before you write to, say your significant other that you're fighting with on your work email.
Yeah, you just want to think, is this going to be subpoenaed one day?
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, back to your exit strategy.
Sorry, back to the exit strategy.
Yeah, speaking of not burning bridges, I mean, this is not a time to badmouth the firm. This is not a time to badmouth other people. You'll probably have some sort of exit interview. This is a good time to kind of nod and smile and be like, yeah, I've really enjoyed my experience. Oh, is there anything you'd do differently or want to tell us about the firm? No, I had a really great experience. Everyone was really helpful, whatever. This is not the time to like vent your frustrations about your boss.
No, agreed. And, make sure you do say goodbye to people that you worked with. They'll appreciate the goodbye, a little like, trinket or gift or Starbucks card for the administrative staff that may have helped you out. Can go a long way.
Never going to be a bad thing.
Never going to be a bad thing.
A nice card, little gift card, a little whatever. Thanks so much for all of your help this summer. I really enjoyed working with you.
Yep.
Ding. That's all you need.
Exactly. And then make sure, especially if you're moving, law students move all the time, that HR knows how to reach you. I think it's less of an issue with cell phones and email these days, but just make sure the firm knows how to reach you and that that you show up to the farewell events unless there's an extreme situation.
Yeah, and this is not the time to decide like, yay, the summer's over. I can get totally trashed on the like, my organization's dollar. No,
that will be the last thing they remember about you.
This is not the time to leave the impression that you're the drunken fool.
Yes, recommend against that.
Yeah, generally here, we just want to leave a good impression on everyone. We want them to be happy if they see you again. But, again, like we said, you want to reflect on whether this is a good fit for you, what you liked, what you didn't like about the experience, what you can take away from it, because this is your life ultimately. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So, this is your professional persona. Like, even if you don't work at this place again, you're going to run into these lawyers again. Just keep that in mind. 5 years from now, you don't want them to be talking about that person at the party.
You don't want to be the girl who jumped to the Hudson. For example, who knows? I summered with her. So anyway, unfortunately, we are out of time with these highly amusing summer associate stories. But if you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on iTunes because we would really appreciate it. And you can subscribe so you don't miss anything. We will get new episodes out on Monday morning. And if you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or Lee. That's Lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or Alison@lawschooltoolbox.com. Or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening. We'll talk soon.